I'm Henri, and welcome to the World War I Stories podcast, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. Some scenes in these stories may be too graphic for sensitive listeners, so listener discretion is advised. Today's episode, A Minute from Freedom, Belgium, 1914. The distant rumble of artillery had become a cruel lullaby to Henri and his family, a sound that filled the silence of their once peaceful home with a constant reminder of the chaos outside. For weeks, they had huddled together in the damp, dark cellar of their farmhouse, the air thick with the musty scent of earth and fear. The walls, once adorned with family photographs and cheerful paintings, now felt like a tomb, echoing the relentless shelling that seemed to creep closer with each passing day. The once lush fields of their farm, where the girls had played and chased butterflies, were now scarred with craters, the vibrant green replaced by the dull brown of churned up earth, a graveyard for their lost innocence. Henri looked at his wife, Marie, and saw the weariness etched in her features, the lines of worry deepening around her eyes. Her once bright smile had faded, replaced by a look of haunted determination. She clutched their daughters, Sophie and Ellie, to her side, their small bodies trembling against her. Sophie, the elder, at 8, had always been the brave one, her laughter ringing like music through the halls, but now her wide eyes reflected a fear that belied her age. Elise, only 5, clung to her sister, her tiny fingers gripping Sophie's dress as if it were a lifeline. The innocence of their faces was marred by the shadows of anxiety that had become their new normal. The laughter that once filled their home, echoing through the halls as they played games and shared stories, had been silenced, replaced by the haunting echoes of war that seeped into their very bones. "We can't stay here any longer," Henri said, his voice barely more than a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might summon the shells that rained down outside. He felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach, a gnawing emptiness that mirrored the dwindling food supplies they had left. The last of their bread had gone stale days ago, and the meager rations of canned vegetables were nearly exhausted. Memories of family dinners filled with laughter and warmth felt like a distant dream. "The shelling is getting too close. Any moment, one could hit the house, and we'll be buried here." Marie nodded, her expression a mix of resignation and determination. Her gaze flickered to the girls, and Henri could see the conflict in her eyes, the fierce love for her children battling against the fear of the unknown. But where will we go?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The battlefield is all around us." Henri felt the weight of her words. The world outside their cellar had become a treacherous landscape, filled with the sounds of destruction and despair. He could almost hear the cries of those who had been forced to flee, their lives shattered by the war. The thought of leading his family into that chaos filled him with dread, but the thought of staying was even worse. He reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Marie's shoulder, trying to convey strength he didn't fully feel. Henri took a deep breath, steeling himself for the dangerous journey ahead. Memories of their last family picnic, where laughter had danced in the air like sunlight, flickered through his mind. "If we head east, we will run into the Germans. We must go west, towards France. We'll have to travel at night. It will still be dangerous, but at least the darkness can help us. Get some rest. We leave tonight." That night, under the cover of darkness, the family gathered what little they could carry. Just a few precious belongings and the weight of their fear. Henri led the way, his heart pounding with every step, each beat echoing the chaos that surrounded them. They froze whenever distant flashes of artillery lit up the night sky, the brief illumination revealing the grim reality of their situation. They knew that if they were seen by either side, their lives could be extinguished in an instant. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, the sound of battle enveloped them like a suffocating shroud, each echo a reminder of the horrors that lay just beyond their sight. The ground shook violently with each explosion, a brutal testament to the war raging nearby, while the air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, stinging their eyes and throats. Henri held Sophie and Elise's hands tightly, their small fingers trembling in his grip, mirroring the dread that coiled in his stomach. He guided them from the safety of one shell hole to another, each crater a fleeting sanctuary in a landscape marked by destruction. With every cautious step, his heart raced with the chilling thought of what awaited them should they stumble into the clutches of the Germans. The propaganda had painted them as merciless Huns, a savage force that would show no mercy to the innocent. The very idea sent shivers down his spine, and he prayed fervently that they were moving towards the French and British lines, for if they were headed towards the German lines, heaven knows what horrors would befall them. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached what they hoped were the beginnings of the British and French trench system. Exhausted and trembling, they spotted a soldier standing at the edge of the trench, his rifle aimed directly at them. The family froze, scarcely daring to breathe, their hearts pounding like war drums in their chests. The soldier's gaze was steely, his finger poised on the trigger, ready to unleash a deadly response at the slightest provocation. Time stretched into an agonizing silence, each second feeling like an eternity. Henri and Marie suddenly clasped hands, their fingers intertwining tightly, a silent promise of solidarity in the face of impending doom. The girls huddled close, their wide eyes reflecting the terror that hung thick in the air, a palpable force that threatened to suffocate them. Henri's pulse quickened as he noticed two other soldiers near the trench's opening, their voices rising in a frantic mix of urgency and anger. Though he couldn't understand their words, the tone was unmistakable. Something was wrong. The soldier with the gun remained fixated on the family, his expression unreadable, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. Suddenly, the tension snapped like a taut wire. The soldier with the gun dropped his weapon, the rifle clattering to the ground with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the stillness of the night. Without a moment's hesitation, he sprinted toward Henri and his family, panic surging through Henri's veins. His instinct screamed at him to run the other way, but before he could react, the two soldiers in the trench leaped out, their shouts piercing the night like a clarion call. Henri couldn't decipher the words of the two soldiers, but their urgent tones conveyed a clear message. They were warning their comrade of the danger he was putting himself in. The air was thick with uncertainty, and Henri felt the weight of their fate hanging in the balance, teetering on the edge of chaos. But before he could react, the soldier reached them, deftly scooping up both girls, one in each arm. He shouted urgently, his words a blur of sound, but the intensity of his demeanor was unmistakable. He motioned for them to follow. Beyond the soldier, Henri could see the other soldiers waving their arms in a frantic come hither gesture, urging them to move quickly. Henri's heart raced as he gripped Marie's hand harder, pulling her behind him. He wants us to follow him, he said, his voice breaking with a mix of fear and hope. The soldier led the way, running towards the trench, signaling for Henri and Marie to follow closely. They dashed after him, the sounds of battle still raging in the distance, but in that moment, they felt a flicker of safety amid the chaos. As they reached the trench, the soldier turned back, his expression a mix of determination and relief. Henri watched as the soldier handed off the girls to his companions. He then turned to Henri and Marie, speaking more words in English that they could not understand, but his tone was reassuring as he led them into the trench. For the first time in weeks, Henri allowed himself to hope. As they attempted to make themselves comfortable in the confines of the trench, the constant fear that had gripped his heart began to ease. He looked at Marie, who was holding Sophie and Elise close, and saw a glimmer of relief in her eyes. They were alive, together, and for now, that was enough. The three soldiers offered the family water and what little food they could spare, which consisted of some hardtack and salt beef. The family ate greedily, even though the rations were small. Henri was exhausted. Marie and the girls momentarily drifted off. For the next few minutes, with shells exploding all around them, Henri attempted to get to know the soldiers, especially the one who had risked his life to save him and his family. He gathered only a few details. The tall, slender British man was named James, another British man was named William, and Anders. Anders had seemed ready to shoot them, but at the last moment chose to save them instead. Henri would be forever indebted to him. Henri could not gather where he was from. Eventually, Henri lost himself to exhaustion and drifted off also. When he awoke, it was to the soldier named James. James spoke in English again, but Henri couldn't understand a word. He glanced around and saw Marie and the girls getting to their feet. Henri then noticed that other soldiers had joined them. While the newcomers seemed wary of Henri and his family, they acted cordial nonetheless. One soldier stepped forward, speaking in French, Henri's native language. "What is your name, sir, and how did you end up in no man's land like that?" the soldier asked. Henri recounted their story. The family's apprehension to leave their small farm, their hiding in the cellar as the shelling grew closer, and their dwindling food supplies that forced their decision to flee. The soldier listened in silence, nodding his head every now and then. "Sounds like you had a hell of a journey." "Anders here almost shot you," he replied. "I know," Henri said with a wry smile. "I'm glad he did not. Look, it's not safe up here. The only reason these guys kept you this close to the line is that they couldn't leave their post. We're their relief. Follow them. They will lead you to the medical trench to get checked out. Then you can be taken far away from this hellhole." William and James started to walk down the trench, and Anders motioned for Henri and his family to follow, which they did. They seemed to walk through the winding fortifications forever, with James and William leading the way, cracking jokes that echoed through the damp air. Henri watched them laugh multiple times, their camaraderie a stark contrast to the grim surroundings. As they moved through the trenches, Henri observed the faces of those fighting this god-awful, meaningless war. They looked tired and dirty. Every now and then, they would pass what appeared to be holes dug into the walls of the trench, where soldiers slept, sometimes with rats crawling on them as they dozed. Henri noticed Marie's face as she took in the scene. She cringed with disgust. "I missed having to do this by 10 years, my love," Henri told her. "Doesn't make it any better," Marie replied, her voice steady but laced with concern. "These conditions are terrible. We've been here for just a few hours. These men have been here for weeks, probably," Henri said, shaking his head. "Boys, Henri. They're just boys," Marie responded, her tone softening. It was then that Henri really looked at the soldiers. Beneath the dirt and grime, they were just boys. None seemed older than 20. A heavy realization settled in his chest. Many of them would not emerge from these trenches to see their families again. Marie patted Henri on the shoulder. "They didn't choose this any more than we did, my love," she said gently. And Henri knew that she was right. Just as they began to believe they might truly be safe, a deafening explosion shattered the air, ripping through the fragile veil of hope. The world around Henri erupted into chaos, a cacophony of screams and destruction. He felt himself hurled to the ground, the force of the blast stealing the breath from his lungs and plunging him into darkness. When Henri regained consciousness, chaos enveloped him like a suffocating shroud. His vision swam as he struggled to comprehend his surroundings. In the midst of the horror, he saw William leap from the trench, panic driving him to flee from the chaos. James remained behind, staring blankly into the distance, his eyes vacant and haunted. Gathering the strength to lift his head, Henri turned to his left, and what he saw shattered his very soul. Tears blurred his sight, and a searing pain coursed through his body and mind. There lay Marie, her eyes wide open, blood pooling at the corners of her mouth. She was still. She was gone. His heart shattered further at the sight of his two little girls, lifeless and cold, still clinging to Marie's side. Nearby, he caught a glimpse of Anders, the soldier who had tried to save them, now motionless on the ground, a grim testament to the futility of their escape. Henri's final thought pierced through the fog of despair. They had almost made it. They had been a minute from freedom. He stared blankly at the smoke-filled sky as the bombs faded away in his hearing, and took his final breath. Thank you for listening to World War I Stories, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. I'm Henri, your host and storyteller. Please like and subscribe, and maybe even leave a review for us wherever you find your podcasts. And join us again for more World War I Stories.